Hey, one more thing before you go. Mid 1880s farmhouse, strange experiences, phantom knocks, missing objects, ghosts, monsters, the Matrix, and UFOs. Much more. Stay tuned when we have a conversation with the man who shares his favorite paranormal and supernatural stories. I'm your host, Michael Herst, and this is That Thing About Stranger Bridgerland. Hi, my guest in this episode is John Olson, who, fueled by his own experiences with the unknown, has spent the last 25 years interviewing and documenting firsthand accounts of those who have witnessed all kinds of strange and unusual phenomena in the Western United States. It's something we're all interested in, something we always had to look over our shoulder, every knock, everything we hear, those strange voices in the middle of the night. He has talked about it. At the age of 8, he began to realize that the home he lived in was peculiar. His parents still owned the old farmhouse built in the mid 1880s. Strange experiences such as phantom knocks, loud boots running from the stairs, missing objects became commonplace for him as he grew up. With each run in with what he called the man in the hat, John's interest grew in the paranormal. His parents forbade him from telling anyone of his experiences for fear of what others in the small community would think. He turned his passion for the paranormal and the supernatural into the Stranger Bridgerland series, which contains firsthand accounts of ghosts, monsters, hauntings, glitches in the Matrix, Sasquatch, and UFOs. And we're going to have an inside look and witness some of those extraordinary experiences. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you about the paranormal today.
I think that, we started right before we started the interview, I was telling you this, everybody's interested in the phenomena of the paranormal and, obviously paranormal, supernatural, anything along that line, because, it's always nice to know whether or not there really is the other side. Do
Mhm.
ghosts really exist? Is Uncle John or somebody still watching me? you know,
Yeah,
uh,
exactly.
and one of those things. So let's talk about, if you don't mind, let's where'd you grow up?
So I grew up in northern Utah, in a small town in northern Utah, and like you mentioned, I grew up in a home that was built in 1883, and by the time I was 8 years old, I realized that my house was different than all my friends' house, that there were weird things going on that didn't happen in my friend's house, and it really got me interested in the paranormal. And from then on, I was reading and trying to find anything I could about the paranormal and learning about it. And later on, it led me into interviewing people about their experiences and writing firsthand accounts from them and my own experiences in my books.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Do you have any brothers or sisters?
I do. I have an older sister that's 4 years older than me, and then a younger brother that's a year younger than me. And we still talk about the things that happened to us and all the different things that's gone on. And it's interesting. My sister has gone into she spent a lot of time doing ghost investigations, and she does her own kind of podcast thing talking about the paranormal. So it kind of spurred all of us on in that kind of direction for a while. So
That's pretty cool, actually. I think, you said your parents kind of forbade you of talking about it. How do they feel about it now since you're kind of really in depth in it and your sister's now really in depth with it?
um,
How
yeah, they're actually much better about it. They're actually really proud of my books and tell people about it. And yeah, it's completely different than when I was a kid. My dad, when I was younger, he even, you know, my mother admitted it but said we couldn't talk about it. My dad denied that the house was haunted and forbid us to talk about it. But as we got older and as things progressed, they've actually shared experiences that they didn't when we were kids, that they had in the house. So, and admitted, yeah, it's haunted, and there's different things that go on there.
Do you think you contributed to them changing their mind, or did they come about, that from a different perspective?
That's a good question. I think that kind of both. I think they come around on their own. I know that over the past, probably 10 years, with, television shows about hauntings and the ghost hunters and different things, have kind of made it easier for people to share their stories. um, when I interview people, I still give them the option of changing their name, and maybe the location a little bit, so if they feel uncomfortable doing that. But I think more and more people are okay with other people knowing their names, and not having that stigma of being a kooky person because they've seen a ghost or even something stranger than that. So.
Yeah, I think that the mainstream television media has basically brought it into our homes, actually.
Hmm.
It really created a phenomena within itself with regard to I remember Ghost Hunters when they first started. I think they're in their, I don't know, 20th season or something along that line. Might be a little bit more than that because I haven't watched them in a little while. I've been so busy with my podcast, I haven't taken the time.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that more and more people are starting to kind of accept the possibility of, or are seeking the thrill of really seeing, hey, maybe I heard something. Could it be that? Could it be something along that line? Do you find that even the people that you interview, do they go into it more skeptical, or are they just trying to find answers? Do you think, or are they just trying to really say, hey, I need validation for this?
I've run into all kinds, when I've interviewed people. Everybody from those that believed before they had their experience, and those that didn't believe whatsoever, or even think about it until they had their experience. And afterwards, after their experience, there's also a huge, spectrum of people, all the way from it spurred them on to want to know more and find out more, and some people who are just, they've had that one experience and it scared them to death and they don't want anything else to do with it. So, everybody has a different reaction to their experience of the paranormal.
Now, when you were growing up, you said that your experience started about when you were 8 years old.
Hmm.
So, when you talked in your, like we said in the introduction and in your bio, you talk about the man in the hat.
Hmm.
So, can you tell me a little bit about that? Let's share that experience with us.
Yeah. So the first time I remember, actually seeing, the gentleman I call the man in the hat is, I was in eighth grade, um, and I came home from school, and nobody was home. My mom was a homemaker, but she was gone somewhere. I'm not sure. So I made myself a sandwich and I went into the front room to watch some TV. And this is like 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and I saw, um, some movement out of the corner of my eye, and I turned, and here's this gentleman standing in the doorway of the front room, and I can see through him. I couldn't see, details in his face, but I could tell that he was wearing overalls and a white shirt, and he had a wide brimmed hat on. And he walked in the room and then sat in a rocking chair across from me and started rocking back and forth. And I remember closing my eyes and counting to 10, and I opened my eyes, and he was gone, but the rocking chair was still rocking. So I jumped up and
Wow.
ran to the front porch and sat there until my mom came home. And that was the first time I remember actually seeing a full body apparition of that gentleman. But what's really fascinating about that is I'm not the only one that's seen him and explained him. Tall, skinny figure, with a white shirt overalls, looking like an old farmer. And um, the home that I grew up in had been in my family since the early 1920s. Was when the first, people bought, great great grandpa or uncle that purchased that home. But when my grandmother passed away, I remember we were helping clean out her house, and there was an old photo album, and we were flipping through it, and I flipped the page, and here's my house from the 1920s with a gentleman standing in front of it in overalls and a white shirt
Wow.
and a wide brimmed hat. And it was a great great grandpa or great great uncle, we're not quite sure which one, who owned the house. So I can actually pinpoint who it is that we see every once in a while in the house as a great great uncle or grandpa that
That
owned it back in the 20s.
that's pretty cool, actually. That,
Yeah.
to get that kind of validation, especially, that would is remarkable, because a lot of
Yeah.
times you hear noises or see something, or, you see an apparition and you don't necessarily know the origins of that apparition,
Hmm.
or that voice or the vision, so that's profound, that's pretty cool, actually.
Yeah, it was quite a shock for me when I flipped over the page, and there he was standing in front of the house, and kind of, like you say, it validated a lot of the things we had seen growing up in the house.
Did you have any more interaction during that time period? I mean, I know you said objects come up
Oh,
missing and things like that. Do you think it was the same person or there was more than one?
I think it's multiple ghosts in there. I think that there are what you would call residual hauntings. That's something like footsteps or knocking or something that you hear that isn't necessarily have an intelligence to it, but it's just something that plays over and over again, almost like a tape. Um, and then there's also definitely interactions in the house. There's uh, a spirit in there, and I don't know if it's the same one with the wide brimmed hat or not. But we always referred to him as the stair monster because we associated it with him with the heavy boot steps on the stairs. But he's always been a trickster. Um, and likes to play pranks, or always liked to play pranks on us growing up, and we kind of associated um, that with him. So I imagine there is actually more than one. I don't know how many, but there was one that was that's definitely a prankster, and then the one we called the man in the hat, the tall man in the hat, as kids, and so it's just interesting all the way around.
Yeah, it really is. And obviously, a house built in the mid 1880s is going to have some history behind it, no
Yeah.
matter what you look
Yes.
at, because of that, and especially that time period. So,
Mhm.
did you, as you grew up, did you always want to be? Did you think you wanted to always be an author of books, or did you have other aspiration? Did you go to university?
Oddly enough, I just went back to school and graduated this last fall with a business degree. Um, but
Congratulations.
thank you. I What happened was I gathered all of these stories and I interviewed people and did it for years. And I remarried about 7 years ago. And when I remarried my lovely wife, she I had to explain to her, what these stories were. I had all these stories, and she, at first I was a little nervous to explain that I interview people about the paranormal, and um, she says, "Well, what are you going to do with those stories?" And I said, "I want to write a book one day." And she goes, "Well, why don't you do it now?" And she was such a
Mhm.
great inspiration for me to write my first one. Um, and since the I wrote the first one, they just kind of, with her help, she's my editor, and she helps a lot with, because I have so many stories, helping me
Right.
select which stories. She's been just a major inspiration to me, and so since then I've written one every year since then. They all usually come out in August, and I have another one this year that will be coming out in August as well, which will be my sixth book. Um, and you know, it's really kind of grown. It used to be, it was just local stuff that I got, local stories, but since my books have gone out, I've gotten stories from Mexico and Canada and all the way out, even further than that. So
Yeah, that's amazing about your wife getting more involved in that. I think that, especially just getting into your marriage, and when she asks you kind of what you do or what you're going to do, and you're going to tell, well, I'm going to tell ghost stories.
yeah.
That might tend to create a little bit of an apprehension there. So kudos
Right.
for that. That's you found a good one. Found a good
Yes,
one.
I did. She's fantastic.
Do you find it hard for people to get people to come open up to you in regard to their stories?
Um, it's getting easier and easier, I think. When I'm able to show people that I change their name, or that I'm respectful with their stories, I still have a stack of stories where I've collected them, but the people haven't given me permission yet. They're still a little weary. Um, but I think that there's more people that are coming forward, and and some of them. One thing that I find that it just fascinates me is I'll tell a story, or I'll get a story, and I'll write it up, and they'll give permission, and I'll put it in a book, and it will be something that I think is fascinating, but kind of a one-off, weird thing that happened to this person. And then I'll get people contact me after that book comes out that would say, I thought I was the only one that had an experience like that.
Mm.
I'll give you an example. This has happened several times, but I'll give you a good example. I wrote a story. It was called "Not My Cousin." It was about a young boy. Well, he's not young a boy now, but when he was a young boy camping, um, he was camping with his cousins and his family, and they were playing hide and seek. And all of a sudden, his cousin, his older cousin that he looked up to, um, was trying to draw him away from camp. He would hide behind the tree and tell him, wave at him to follow him, and so he would go up to that tree, and his cousin would be gone, and he's further up the canyon, and he's waving him to follow him, and finally he was like, we're too far from camp. I'm going back, and he was really upset, and he makes it back to camp, only to find that his cousin never left camp. His cousin was with his mother the whole time, and was really strange. Whatever this
Wow.
was that was mimicking his cousin to draw him away. And I wrote up that story, and since then I've had 5 or 6 people contact me saying they've had a very similar experience where something was mimicking a cousin or a brother or someone that was just older than them, of authority, trying to lure them into an abandoned building or into the woods. But come to find out, they were never really there. Their cousin was somewhere else, and so it kind of opened up the door of what is this strange phenomenon going on.
Yeah,
Um,
that's pretty crazy. Did you ever come up with a solution to that? Like,
um, I've done a lot of research. I try to do a lot of research when I get a story like that. I dive into folklore. I dive into a bunch of stuff to try and figure out. The only thing that I can come up with is a very similar situation to what's called a doppelganger. Um, some entity or something that's mimicking, can either mimic yourself or mimic somebody else. But to what end, I don't know. I can say, after the number of people that have come to me telling me their stories about it, that there's definitely something to it. But um, maybe they're just the ones that were lucky enough to stop in time. I don't know. It's fascinating though. I find that that's one of them that I find really fascinating.
yeah, I think I do as well. I think that it's a very unique perspective on a ghost story, basically, because
Right.
they're trying to be lured by somebody that they think that they see that's familiar to them,
Hmm.
and then somewhere down the line, there's got to be some bizarre motivation for that on one end of it. And have you ever talked to anybody that has been affected by a poltergeist, or had been injured or hurt, or something along that line?
Yeah, I've interviewed several people who've had interactions with ghosts that move things, or um, I have generally veered away from stories about um, oh, I don't, how do I explain it? Evil entities, unless it's in the form of, for example, in one of my last books, I interviewed a woman who had an experience with a Ouija board, and it went really badly. And she was a kind of attacked afterwards, her and her boyfriend at the time. And I wrote it in the way that she wanted, that it was a warning to other people not to get involved in that kind of a thing. Because I tend to believe that just personally, if you go looking for something um, bad, I guess you could say, you're gonna find it, if that makes sense. But so there's definitely been stories where people have had experiences that were on the darker side for sure.
Yeah, that is, and can you help us understand, or the listeners? I understand, but for let's say our newer
Mhm,
listeners and some maybe that don't understand. I know that you mentioned doppelganger,
mhm.
which is. Can you help us understand doppelganger and then understand poltergeist, for example, what the difference
Right.
may be and what kind of what they are, so we can learn a little bit.
Yeah, you bet. So a doppelganger is in folklore and um, and in stories that go back quite a ways. A doppelganger is somebody that mimics either yourself or someone that you know. Um, and so there's actually not too long ago, I interviewed a gentleman who was working late. Um, and he was in Florida and he worked in an engineering place, and there something had gone wrong, and so he had to work late in this old building. And all of a sudden there was he was all alone in the building, and something was trying to get his attention. Somebody was calling to him, and when he walked out and looked on the stairs, it was whatever it was looked just like him. It was his doppelganger. It looked just like him, and it was actually motioning to him and calling out to him to follow him, and he freaked out and locked himself in his office, which I would for sure.
I don't blame
Um,
him. That would be
you know,
very bizarre.
no. So for whatever reason, it's an entity or whatever you want to call it that mimics somebody else, whether it's in voice or in looks or whatever that might be. Um, and a poltergeist it's actually German for noisy ghost, if it is the direct translation. Um, And a lot of times, when a poltergeist, which has to do with objects moving, or it could even be voices or things of that nature, for whatever reason, a lot of times it will have to do with um, kids who are just becoming teenagers. Um, for example, I had a
Hmm.
gentleman contact me. It was actually a friend of mine that I'd known for many years, and he goes, "I know you do this." He said, "We started having uh, issues with things moving and you know voices and we our house is new." And I said, do you have somebody that just started being a teenager, a girl probably that just became a teenager and was going through adolescence? And he goes, well, yeah, I do. I actually have two that just started. And I said, well, I said, keep an eye on it, because for some reason, whatever that reason is, and I don't know, um, it has to do, and a lot of times with teenage girls that are going through adolescence and becoming teenagers, there's just something that, whether it's kinetic power, I don't really know, but that's what generally poltergeist is, something that a ghost or an energy like that will move things in the house, or um, voices, or and that can go on for a year or so and then disappear for no reason as well, which is really kind of strange.
Yeah, that's well, having two daughters that went through the teenage phase within a couple of years
Uh-huh.
aside from each other. I'm not sure if I can differentiate the difference between teenage angst and
Right.
I'll have to go back and re-examine that now. See,
Yeah. Yep.
just
And it
just
doesn't always happen, but for some reason it's connected somehow, and I'm not sure why. It's a very strange phenomenon.
I was like they've had movies, the poltergeist movies, where they're like this major evil entities that are just out
Hmm.
to kind of really do damage to people and so forth.
Right.
With each one of your interviewees, I know that you said a little bit earlier you do research and so forth. So have you done a lot of research and in-depth background? Like if you talk to somebody, do you do the historical perspective, like where the house is, how old it is, the location, and that kind of a thing to help kind of subs- uh, I won't say validate or and substantiate part of their story, but they maybe help figure it out. Sort of like from a
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you
Well,
off
that's
there.
all right. So yeah, sort of like from a like I'm a retired cop. So for me,
Hmm.
it would be like an investigation to kind of get a little more. Can I say this is like you did when you found the
Hmm.
picture and the picture went, oh, that's the guy I saw. That's like the grandfather or the uncle.
Yeah. If it's something that's going on currently, yes, I definitely will talk to them. Because I've had people come to me and they say, I think my house is haunted. Something strange is going on, and so I'll talk to them. I'll do an interview with them. A lot of times when I interview somebody, it's something that's happened to them years ago. Um, but if it's something that's recent that's going on and it's in their house or something of that nature, I'll do an interview with them. If it's close enough, I'll go to their house and talk to them. There's times where it's simply something that's going on in the house that's actually normal. A furnace that's acting up or something that's contributing to strange sounds. I try and eliminate when I'm talking to somebody the the easiest things first, and then we go into, well, okay, is there something that's changed in the house, some activity that's going on. If it's an older home, you look into it, maybe see if there was a death or something of that nature. When I talk to somebody too, I also try and let them know if it's just what I call a regular ghost, somebody who used to be alive that's not anymore. The funny thing is, I say it's just like if you meet 10 people on the street, 9 out of 10 people are going to be good people, down to earth people. It's that 1 out of 10 that's a jerk that you meet on the street. It's the same. If they were a jerk in life, they're going to be a jerk in their afterlife, I guess you could say. And so it's those that you have to kind of worry about if it's just that kind of situation. It wasn't too long ago, I think last year, I was working with a family and they had a little girl that they had adopted, and she was starting to see things that were really scaring her, and we couldn't eliminate anything that was or normal that would be causing this. And I actually was able to contact a group that I trust that is a paranormal research group that came in to do different things, and I think they were able to determine that it was somebody attached to the girl from the family that they had adopted from that was really just trying to check in and make sure she was okay. Um,
Mm.
and after they were able to validate that it went away, whatever it was, whoever it was. Um, and so it's amazing all different kinds of hauntings that you can have, and in ways that we help people, or I've been able to help people, or if it's on the other side of the country, point them in the right direction to get help. So.
Did this inspire you to do any ghost hunting of your own? Hey, just a real quick reminder. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much for being a part of the One More Thing Before You Go family. Please remember to subscribe and or follow us. We would greatly appreciate it. We do have an app that's available for you for free. You'll find it in the App Store or on Google Play. It is compliments of Superpass, our sponsor. Anything that you want to do with your business to take it to the next level, have an entertainment or an information hub in the palm of your hand, it's Superpass. It will give you the unique opportunity for everything. One more thing before you go. Please take the time to support us by subscribing, following, and visiting our unique merchandise store at beforeyougopodcast.shop. You'll find that link to the store in our website. It is beforeyougopodcast.shop. You can find our website at beforeyougopodcast.com.
I have gone with groups to do ghost hunting before, and I enjoy it when we go and do that. I get invited to go do that with different groups in historical places where I'm at. Um, I don't do it on a regular basis. Just I've had so many experiences growing up that it's I like doing it on occasion, but I don't have a group that I go with all the time.
Interesting. Though on those particular instances that you were with somebody, did you find anything unusual that you hadn't seen or heard before?
Not really, not anything that I hadn't heard before. It's really fun when we have a group that I get invited to go, and we have some old theaters in the area that I live, and they're able to investigate there, and they find some good EVPs or some stuff like that. It's kind of exciting to do and fun to do that way. So usually around Halloween time, I get invited to go with those groups, and it's a lot of fun.
My
So.
wife and I, when we watch, we have our favorites when we watch some of these paranormal programs, and Of them, some of our favorite things are the EVPs because obviously that's a valid communication, or if they're holding a communication where they're actually having a talk or a conversation, which I find,
Right.
we find very unique because they're actually answering you and
Yeah.
and so forth, which is pretty cool because it kind of validates. One more thing before you go is all about, even we talk about supernatural, we talk about paranormal, we talk about what's possibility of what's on the other side and whether it exists.
Hmm.
And, to me, it kind of validates that just a little bit more when you can hear that and see that. It's pretty cool. It's pretty
Yeah,
cool.
it
Um,
is.
I know that you talk about from the bio and the information I've gotten from you. Let's talk a little bit about monsters because you say you talk about those too.
Yeah, I've interviewed people who've seen Bigfoot, and those are some of my favorite ones. Stories about Bigfoot and Sasquatch. This area in northern Utah seems to be a hotbed for sightings at different times of the year um, in northern Utah, and also in an area it's called the Uinta Mountains. If you've ever heard of the show or heard of Skinwalker Ranch, that
I
sits on the
have.
edge of, yeah, it sits on the edge of the Uinta Mountains. And so, yeah, I've interviewed several people who've had Bigfoot experiences. I've also interviewed people who have run into other creatures that are really strange. Uh, I interviewed a gentleman many years ago, and his story's in one of my books. He was hiking alone, and he wasn't supposed to be, but his friend canceled on him, and he was hiking alone, and he decided to camp for the night. And so he went to bed just with his bedroll out there in the stars. And in the middle of the night, he got woken up uh, with something, and he couldn't figure out what had woken him up. And all of a sudden, he get hit in the chest with a little rock. And so he's looking for his headlamp that he usually sleeps with, and he finally finds it. And he finally realizes it's still on his head, and he turns it on and looks, and about 15 feet from him, sitting on this little pile of rocks, is this really strange creature. Um, It was grayish green with pointed nose and almost what you would expect like a troll or something like that you've heard of would look like. And he was kind of in shock. It had ragged old clothes, he said, on. And whenever he goes camping or goes hiking, he brings a book to read as he goes to bed, just brings an old paperback book that he can read to help him go to sleep. And he notices this creature's trying to hide something behind him, and he realizes it's got his book in his hand. And at that point, he realizes that this creature's been close enough to slip the book away from him and steal it. And he at this point he snaps to and freaks out. Grabs his stuff and runs out. Just runs out of the mountains and gets to his truck. And he told me this story, and he's like, "That's the only encounter I've ever had." And he wanted me to change his name because it's just such a strange story. And he says, I'm not it's funny how many people will go, I'm not crazy. They start their story like that. I promise I'm not crazy, but this story is really strange. So I got that story and I wrote that story, and in where it happened was near a mountain here called Mount Naomi. And about a year later, after that, I had a lady contact me, and she said, I about died when I read that story because when I got married, my husband told me that he was hunting elk near Mount Naomi and saw a strange creature, and he explained it to me. And I laughed at him and told him he was crazy. And then I read your story, and it was the exact same
Well,
explanation that I read in your book is what he told me he saw, 25 years ago while hunting up there. So that, which is really cool too, to get another story, because that one's like, it's very, I realize that's a way out there story, but it's just fascinating that things like that can happen. And then again, I went, into folklore and everything, and come to find out that the Native Americans have talk about creatures like that live in the forest and steal things and are really mean, nasty little buggers that and in their folklore and in their oral history, they talk about those creatures. So again, I was able to, you know, tell him that he wasn't crazy, that he wasn't the only one that's seen it. So
Yeah, what a bizarre story. I think I'd start sleeping in a tent.
yeah, exactly. I would too. Growing up, I spent a lot of time alone in the mountains, and after hearing a lot of these stories, I'm like, I don't think I should have done that as a young man.
Yeah, it kind of makes a new perspective.
Yeah.
Retrospect makes a new perspective. That's pretty cool.
Yep.
Yeah, that's kind of I've not heard of that kind of a creature before from some of the stories that I've heard in the interviews that I've done, but
Hmm.
trolls and anything along that line, trolls and fairies and, you know, uh, what do you call them? I can't think of the other ones right now. The,
Yeah.
anything like that, they've had sure, they're folklore, or they
Hmm.
come from a fantasy novel, but they had to come from somewhere.
Right.
It had to start somewhere, even if it's somebody in somebody's mind, that something had to trigger that to
Hmm.
create that, and such the way that it comes about. Gnomes and, that are alive and things like that. So, yeah, that's pretty
Yeah.
cool. I believe that there's monsters out there. I mean, we can't be the only ones here, right?
Right. And it's just kind of amazing the different things that you come across. And you mentioned, there's you have folklore from all over the world. But
Mhm.
I find it one thing that I find fascinating is in one part of the world, they will have a creature and then it has a different name, but it has the same features
Yeah.
as somewhere else in the world. They just have a different name for it. And so it would be kind of strange that, way back in the day, they somehow came up with the same creature
Mm.
a world away from each other. So there's got
And
to be
prior
something to it. So,
and prior to the internet.
right,
So
exactly. Yep.
somebody can't just look it up, 100 years ago, you couldn't 200 years ago, you couldn't look up on the internet and say, "Oh, well, yeah, I got one of those in my backyard."
Yeah, exactly.
They come up with the same stuff, which is kind of pretty cool. Um,
Yeah.
the what let's talk about haunting glitches in the Matrix and actually the
Yeah.
Matrix.
Yeah, those are kind of some of my favorite stories too. I started collecting these stories. I call them glitches in the Matrix because they don't really fit with anything else in the paranormal world. I've collected a lot of different stories, of time slips, or one of them that I is a good
Can,
example.
can I interrupt you real quick, if you don't mind, please?
Yeah,
What's the difference between paranormal and supernatural?
I think they're about the same thing. I think it's just different names for it, at least from what I understand. Um, they're both kind of explain things that happen that we may not have a scientific explanation for yet. I,
Mm,
I, I say that yet because um, before we could before we could fly, that was supernatural
all
until
right,
we were able to explain it. So I think they're right along the same lines for
same
sure.
stuff. Okay, sorry about
Yeah.
that. I just thought maybe we
Oh
might
no, you're
interject that
okay.
really quick.
Yeah, no, you're fine. So one of the things that I find is people who have memories that don't match what really happened. And I'll give you a quick example of that. I interviewed a gentleman. He grew up in a small town in Colorado, and he graduated in the early 90s or something like that. And he graduated from high school, and he went and served 2 years for his church in another country doing service. And then he came back and was going to get ready to go to college. And when he came back, he was doing work for a company, going around installing working on people's computers, I believe, personal computers. And he went to a house, and he's like, "Oh, I know this house. My friend lives here." Um, and I can't remember her name right off the top of my head. That's kind of left me, but it was a friend of his from high school. And when he went in, it was an older lady that lived there. And he asked, "Well, my friend used to live here," and she said, "Well, I bought it from this family. Their daughter had died, and they moved away." And so he thought about it, and he went to the library and looked it up, and his friend had died. She had died of something. the year after high school, and he looked it up, and she had died of an appendicitis. It had burst, and he went to her grave and everything, and kind of had his own mourning for her because he didn't know that she had passed, and like I said, he went to her grave and everything, and then he went off to school and grew up, got married, had kids, and one year he was back visiting his parents who still lived in the small town for Thanksgiving, and they were getting ready to have dinner, and his mom said, "I forgot the whipped cream. Can you run up to the store and get whipped cream for me?" And he said, "Yeah, sure." So he runs up to the store, and it's kind of packed with people getting last minute things for Thanksgiving, and he comes around the corner and runs into a cart, and he looks up, and it's his friend that's pushing the cart, and she's got a little kid with her, and he's kind of in shock, and he's like, "Oh, hey," and she's like, "Oh, I haven't seen you in forever," and gives him a hug, and he's like, "Are you okay? What's," and he's in shock because he remembers that she was dead, and he says, "Weren't you sick after high school or something? I remember," and she goes, "Oh, I had an appendicitis and it almost killed me, but I made it through barely," and so they talk for a minute, and he leaves the store, leaves the whipped cream in the store, gets in his car, drives to the cemetery, and the the, the plot's gone, her headstone's gone, everything's gone, and she's now alive and married with kids. But he remembers distinctly that she had passed away, and seeing her grave and reading um, her obituary and everything. And so his memory just absolutely does not match what real life is now. And so has no idea why, but he's very adamant. He's like, "I didn't dream it. I know. I remember going to the cemetery. I remember where the plot was and everything, but
Wow.
um, it's different now than what he remembers." And
That's pretty
so
wild.
it's yeah, it's really strange. If you've ever heard of the Mandela effect, where
Yeah.
things are and this is what I call a personal Mandela effect, where you're the only one that remembers it a certain way, but you're pretty sure that it happened that way,
It kinda makes you wonder whether or not the Matrix exists, and
right?
that the television show is just to kinda play games with us. I mean, not the television, but the movie, just
Just
to
a
play
movie,
games with
yeah,
us. So like, "Hey, yeah, this is a movie, enjoy it, but, hey, this is
yeah,
really happening."
yeah.
If
It's
that's
crazy. It's crazy,
yeah, if that's the case, I have some changes I'd like. Please,
right?
just a few.
Exactly, right.
Do
Oh,
you have any, I know you believe in UFOs?
I do, yeah. I've interviewed a lot of people who've seen UFOs, different experiences like that. Um, and yeah, I really do. I'm really excited, kind of, that the government is now opening up a little bit.
So am
I
I.
don't know how much. I don't know how much they will tell us eventually, but I hope that someday we come to what they call disclosure, and they finally admit everything they know. But we'll have to see. But yeah, I definitely have interviewed a lot of people who've seen UFOs, including family members of mine that I've interviewed that's had encounters with UFOs.
That's yeah, I like the fact that the government has released, like, the footage from the Navy fighters, which was
Hmm.
fantastic because obviously it's something that they couldn't explain. And,
Hmm.
they kinda cover their butts just a little bit by going, "Well, we got this explained, but we really didn't explain this." So the possibility still exists that maybe, possibly, kinda for sure, but maybe not, you
Yeah.
know?
Yep.
But, as long as it's been going around and as long as we have been here and as much with that is within history and embedded within history, the show Visitation from Another Planet,
Hmm.
in the carvings and the inscriptions and old, ancient civilizations that they've carved this into a mountainside and
Uh-huh.
so forth. There has to be,
Yeah. Yep.
possibility that this exists. And in my opinion, this is just my opinion, my wife's opinion. Realistically, as large as the universes are, this isn't the only universe. And to think that there's nothing out there other than us,
Yeah.
is really kind of naive, I think, and gullible from that perspective. And with that being said, if they want to show up on my front door and ask me how I'm doing, I'm okay with that.
Right. Yeah,
Okay.
I am too. So I am too, for sure.
It's what's your most interesting UFO story?
I interviewed a gentleman who he at the time he was in college and he lived in Idaho and he delivered parts for a parts company and he traveled quite a bit. And his boss calls him in on Thursday, says, "I've got a late delivery. It's got to go to Jackson Hole, Wyoming," um, which I think was about 70-mile run. And he says, "If you take it tonight, I'll pay for your hotel room and dinner, and then you can have the rest of the weekend off." And so he jumped at it, being single, and he he took the money, but he took his bedroll to put in the back of his truck because he's like, "I'm just going to take the money and then sleep in my truck." And so he delivered the parts, and then he's traveling back through the mountains, and he gets tired, so he pulls off the side of the road, puts his bedroll out in his truck, and lays down. And about 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning, he wakes up and the inside of his cab is just lit up, and there's a hum. And so he climbs out of the back of his truck, and about not quite 100 yards from him is a triangle craft, and it's hovering over this little river. It was more like a creek that ran by where he was at, and there was a blue beam coming down, and it was sucking water up into the craft. He could see, and he stood there and just watching in awe. And then all of a sudden, it the beam goes off and the hum stops, and he said he was close enough that he could hear the rest of the water that was suspended to fall down into the creek. And then it just kind of turned, and then boom, and it was gone. And it was just quiet night again. And so he couldn't sleep, so he got in his truck and drove off. But ever since that night, he's just been fascinated with
Wow.
UFOs, which you could only imagine. But um, yeah, so that's one of my favorite ones that I've actually interviewed people about.
I'm starting to see a pattern with bedrolls and sleeping outside.
Yes, exactly. I think I don't know if it's the part of the country I am where it's a lot of outdoors. I get a lot of outdoor stories from um, hunters and hikers and
That's a good thing, though.
things
I
like
mean,
that.
I
So
grew up in
yeah.
Colorado, and I grew up in
Oh
Colorado
yeah.
before. I'll give my age away a little bit here now, but it was before it got so full of people, basically, because now my relatives, I now live in Arizona, but back home, I've still got relatives back there that say just the amount of people that have moved in there, just like, crazy amount of
Yeah.
people that have moved in there. But, I grew up there where we used to sleep. We have a fort and stay out till as late as we could. We had a fort built out in the middle of nowhere. And
Yeah.
as I'm pointing to it, as you can see me pointing over my
Yeah.
shoulder here,
Hmm.
bad habit talking with my hands.
Yeah.
But, we had and we spent a lot of times outdoors. And, there were times that we thought we saw something up there. And you couldn't tell what it
Yeah.
was. We thought, "Well, there's a shooting star or something like that." And, it's always fascinated me, UFOs, and this whole supernatural, paranormal aspect have always fascinated me to a point that I probably should, kind of take a leap further myself and maybe start, I'm retired, so I could, embark on a new journey and start really exploring these things. But I'm also kind of, I kind of like my house.
Yes. Yeah.
Uh,
You're like me. You like your creature comfort. So
exactly. I can, go out on the back
yeah.
patio, have a cup of tea, and look at the nature out there in the backyard, and it's all good. It's
Yeah.
kind of cool. What's your favorite ghost story?
Oh boy, there's a lot of different ghost stories that I really enjoy.
Well, give me two of your favorite. How's that?
Two of my favorites. Well, I'll tell you one that happened to me that was probably my favorite one that happened to me. In that same home, my parents still live in the home that I grew up in, and for some reason, whenever they used to go on vacation, um, there was always some more activity than regular. And I remember they were gone. This is about 7 or 8 years, actually 8 years ago. They were going to go on a cruise, and they asked me if I wanted to just house sit, and so I said sure. And just to keep an eye, they have a little dog. It's a little Shih Tzu. His name is Bassa, and that's the biggest thing, to feed the cats and make sure Bassa's okay. And so my youngest at the time, who was probably 6, 7, he's like, "Oh, we're gonna stay. Let's stay up and have a movie night because it was Friday night when we went." And of course, by 11 o'clock, he's passed out, my youngest. So I scoop him up and take him upstairs in the room that we were staying in. And I come back down, and Bassa usually sleeps with my mother, but if we're there and she's gone, he usually sleeps with whoever. And he was sitting in the kitchen in his little bassinet. I asked him if he wanted to go to bed, and he just kind of rolled over and started snoring. And so I said, "I'll leave you there." So I just checked all the doors, made sure everything was locked, and I went to bed. And uh, about 2 o'clock in the morning, I woke up and I could just hear a horrible racket going on in the kitchen. Um, and I could hear Bassa barking. And so I got up and I went down the stairs. And as my foot hit the bottom stair, the banging stopped, and Bassa barked a couple more times and then went dead quiet. And so I walked into the kitchen and I flipped the light on. And it was at this point I realized that what the banging was, because every door and every cabinet drawer was at an angle. That's what was going on. The cabinets and the drawers were all banging and everything.
Wow.
Um, and so I I shut all of those, and I found Bassa. He was under the table just shaking. He was so
Right.
upset. And so I scooped him up and made sure the doors were locked, and went up and back to bed. But and what's funny is I tell people that I just went back to sleep, and they're like, "Are you crazy? That's so scary." And I said, "Well, when you grow up in that kind of situation, you think it's kind of cool, but you don't think it's that scary."
Yeah, exactly.
Um,
Just go back. Yeah, time. Go back to
yeah,
sleep.
just go back
Don't
to
wake me up
sleep.
again.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
But it was fascinating to me because that takes a lot of energy for whatever it was
Right.
to swing all those doors and everything open. Um,
Well, and
Another
realistically,
one
well, I'm sorry.
oh, sorry. Go ahead. No, go. You're just fine. Go ahead.
As I say, realistically, I mean, everything that I've learned about it, it does take a lot of energy. Usually, and that's from when lights are on, or if something's on that allows them to
Mhm.
draw from that energy. So you had shut everything down and went to bed.
Yeah. Yep. So whatever it was, and again, for whatever reason, whenever my parents went on vacation, that was when the energy really ramped up. There would go months and months where nothing happened, and then there would be a couple weeks where it was kind of crazy. So um, it's kind of fascinating that
That's
way.
wild.
The other ghost story, one that I really like. I interviewed this gentleman, and when he was much younger, when he was just a teenager, him and his older brother had gone deer hunting, and there's a canyon up there. It's called Scare Canyon, and I think it's interesting too how all of these places get names, and then strange things happen there. Scare Canyon, Devil's Half Acre, Devil's Den, and people don't remember how they get their names, but strange things go on there. It's kind of fascinating. But
It fits.
him and his yeah, it does exactly. Um, but there was a big canyon. It's called Scare Canyon, and him and his brother had driven up to go deer hunting there, and they'd spent all day hunting and not seen anything, and it was getting to be dusk, so they sit up on on the edge where they could just glass and watch for the deer to come out. And while they're sitting there, his brother all of a sudden his brother looks at him, and he puts his hand to his ear like, "Listen, listen." And so he's expecting to hear something walking like a deer or something, and they can hear a kid crying, and they're like, "What the heck?" And his brother gets up and he follows his brother down through the trees, and as they're going, this crying is getting louder, and they come to an opening, and there's a big rock, and here's a little boy in dirty overalls. He's got no shoes, dirty feet. He says he when he closes his eyes, he can still see this kid. He's got tear streaks through his dirty face where he's been crying. And his brother looks at him and he goes, "Are you okay?" to this kid. And the little kid points a certain direction, and then he disappears right in front of him.
Oh, that's
And it's
crazy.
dead silent. It's dead silent, and there's nothing going on. And yeah, he went this kid went from being a solid, it's dusk, so it's a little dark, but goes from a solid person to disappearing right in front of them. And he says he has no idea where this kid was pointing, but they they took off. They got out of there as quick as they could. And he tried anytime he tried to talk to his older brother about it over many years. This was actually in the 70s that he said when he was a teenager that it had happened. It took nearly 20 years before his brother
Wow.
would openly talk to him about it. It freaked him out that much.
Wow. That's
So
crazy.
who knows what that was, but it's kind of fascinating.
Probably pointing to where his body is,
That's what I'm thinking too.
saying,
Like almost as if he'd been lost. And I kind of looked to see, if there was any sign of kid being lost from way back, and I couldn't find anything in any reports or anything that I could find. So, but definitely freaky.
yeah, that's a crazy story. But I mean, I think the mountains hold a lot of secrets that we don't all know about until, the right moment when they pop up,
Right.
from that perspective. So that's pretty cool. So obviously you've enjoyed your career with writing and collecting these ghost stories from all over the country. I think that that's a
Hmm.
brilliant job. And,
Yeah.
you're obviously very good at it. And,
Oh,
I
thank
think
you.
that what you've accomplished so far is really a positive thing. Let's
Thank you very much.
talk about your books and how somebody can find you and how they can find your books. Because I put 3 of them up here, but I
Uh-huh.
know that you've got 5 and you're working on a 6th.
Yep, they're actually all available on Amazon, in either softback. There's a few that have a hardback, and then Kindle version. Um, and there is actually a few that are on Audible that if you like to listen to books as well. I'm hopefully will get the rest of those on in the next year. You can contact me or actually find out more about my books at www.strangerbridgerland.com, and that has my website. It actually talks about my books and a lot of things that are coming up. I have a paranormal conference. I did one last year here in northern Utah, and it went really well. Where I was able to have other authors and speakers come talk and along with me, and I will be doing that again in this October, and there will be information about that as well. So definitely on Amazon and StrangerBridgerland.com.
And that conference that you're talking about starts when?
So it'll be October 14th and 15th here in northern Utah, in Logan, Utah, and my website will have a lot more information about that as well. I have, in my experience, I've met a lot of people from all over, and they come and speak at the conference they did this last year, and I have more people coming as well, and um, booths and just all kinds of fun things we had at it, and it's just really a fun experience for people who love the paranormal. So.
Oh, very cool. Starts on my birthday. So
Oh, nice.
I might have to find Logan, Utah,
Yes, definitely.
and check it out. I'll have all of that information and how to contact you and your website on my website, beforeyougopodcast.com as well. So anybody that didn't have a chance to write it down or take a screenshot of it, I will have that available for you in the show notes so that everybody has easy access to finding you and your books. I think they've got some fascinating stories in them. I've perused a couple of them, and I think that is going to inspire, motivate you, is going to scare you, is going to make you think about what's on the other side.
Yeah.
So, pretty cool. Um, this is one more thing before you go. Do you have any words of wisdom for our listeners out there and our viewers?
Yeah, I just keep your mind open and keep your eyes open, because one thing I've learned is that you never know when the paranormal is going to be there, because it can come at any time. Just keep your eyes and your mind wide open.
Outstanding, profound words of wisdom. John, thank you very much for sharing your experiences, your story, your opportunity for other people to learn about the paranormal and the supernatural. And I appreciate you being a guest on One More Thing Before You Go.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to this episode of One More Thing Before You Go, a unique conversation about life. If you like our show and want to know more, check out our website at beforeyougopodcast.com. That's beforeyougopodcast.com. Tell your story, share your expertise, contribute to the blog, and subscribe to the newsletter. You can find us as well as subscribe to the program and rate us on your favorite podcast listening platform.
And one more thing before you go. Have a nice day, have a nice week, and thanks for listening.
One More Thing Before You Go, a unique conversation about life podcast, is a creation of One More Thing Productions, established 2010, all rights reserved.